What's going on, YouTube? Today's video is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. I tend to prefer to get out on the trails and ride and talk about whatever our subject for the day is. Unfortunately, right now it's the middle of the winter, it's kind of crappy outside, and I need actual notes to do this video because there's quite a bit in here. So the caveat to today's video is that we're not going to talk about any of the custom stuff that was done, like the suspension. And the reason for that is that those things are so variable. They're going to change a lot from shop to shop because of the shop rate. It's going to vary by what parts and how much is needed and what work is all actually done. So every suspension setup is going to be different for every different person. So we're not going to include that in today's video, but we are going to talk about every single part that I procured that you can also buy from an online retailer or at your local KTM dealer and have installed or install yourself onto your bike. So I want to start with all of the KTM power parts, which I procured through AOMC, and as we go, we're going to break down the parts groups by where I got them from, but other than that, not in any other real specific order. So except for the GPS mount bracket that goes right above the dash that I actually bought at the dealership when I procured the bike, that piece honestly is done better than I thought it would. I thought it was going to be quite floppy and shaky because it's just a plastic structure that pretty much looks like it was 3D printed or molded, injection molded. But it's been much more sturdy than I give it credit for, especially considering how heavy the GPS unit is that's on it. So great buy. I do believe that there are also some aluminum ones that are available, which look much sturdier. And my understanding is that it's the same mount as the 790 and 890, so there should be crossover, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% certain. That's just what I've heard, so take that as you will. The next power part I want to cover is the rear rack. The KTM rear rack is actually quite large. Compared to some of the other offerings, it's a little bit larger and a bit more expensive. But it has a great set of bars that act as handles for a pillion, and I like that it pushes the rack further back away from the pillion seat so that you can fit a larger bag on the back, or you can turn like a duffel bag sideways and still have a tail bag. It just gives me a little bit of extra space and it's really sturdy. So not much to say about that. It's a great rear rack, if a little bit pricey compared to some of the other aftermarket options. We also procured the folding or rotating levers from the KTM Power Parts catalog, both the clutch and the brake. I always buy at least one extra set of levers right away when I pick up a new bike that I know I'm going to off-road, just so I can have those with me when I do go, in case something breaks and I need to swap a lever out. This is my first time having folding levers, and I've only just recently actually installed them. They've been sitting on my workbench for 2 years. Or I finally got around to putting them on. I never broke any of the stock ones, but I like having the folding ones just in case. So by far the most expensive KTM power part accessory that I procured through AOMC was the spoked wheel set. It's a really cool set, but it's sometimes difficult to get a hold of. When I ordered it, originally it was on back order and it took months for me to get it. Then it was completely discontinued for a while, and now it's showing as available on AOMC's website in early March of 2024. But that may not last. So my recommendation is that if you're interested in these wheels, also investigate some of the companies that can build you a set. I would reach out to like Warp 9 or Woody's or some of those different places I believe might be able to put a set together, just to find out if that's a better possibility than waiting as long as I did to get my wheels and go through the struggles that I did to get them installed. If you want to hear more about what all the issues I had were getting the wheels on the bike and ready to go, you can check out my last video where we do a ride and we have a discussion about what it took to get that bike back on the road. So definitely check that out. So the last KTM power part accessory I want to talk about is the enlarged side stand foot. I find these things to be really useful, especially up here in the PNW where there's a lot of like wet, mushy ground. You don't want to stop, put your kickstand down, and then turn around to see your bike sinking into the ground and falling over. That's always a real pain, and I've experienced that myself, going to some different campsites to do some moto camping. Enlarged side stand foots always help out quite a bit, and they're reasonably inexpensive, so they're a worthwhile accessory in my opinion, especially for nearly 400-pound bikes like the 390 and anything larger. Okay, moving on. Black Dog Cycle Works. Currently, the only accessory from Black Dog that I have installed on the bike is the traction foot pegs. I previously had their skid plate, but we actually replaced that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But for right now, it's just the traction foot pegs, and I have to say that that is one of the single best upgrades I have made with the KTM 390. They're huge, they're leveling so that the foot pegs are no longer canted forward. They have tons of grip and lots of room. My feet are really comfortable to ride on them for a very long time. I don't feel my feet getting worn out even after 8-9 hour days in the saddle, and that's saying something. And they have phenomenal grip. They're also completely billet and really rugged and sturdy. Absolutely a worthwhile upgrade. I think it's probably one of the best things I've put on the bike, so would recommend, even though they are a bit pricey. Next is SW Motec. So the only SW Motec accessory that's currently installed are the Cobra wraparound handguards. These also are really sturdy. They've worked out extremely well for me, at least in terms of actual protection. So far, the bike has had, I think, 2 or 3 right side dirt naps, and all that's happened is there's been a little bit of scuffing on those handguards, but they've not actually bent or taken any other real structural damage. They were easy to install and they look great. The only negative I can say for them is that the handguards extend up far enough, and there's additional deflectors you can get. They don't seem to extend it down far enough to really take the wind off the tips of my fingers on the bottom. So that's the only negative mark I can give them. But as far as sturdiness and ability to protect your hands, they do an amazing job. So good price, good handguards. Moving on to the Garmin Zumo XT. That's the GPS system that I've been using. It's a fairly pricey system and it's still available, but there is also now the XT2 that is available. I'm not sure what the difference between those two are, but I can say that the Garmin XT has been a phenomenal system for me over the last 2 years or so of adventuring. I've heard other people have issues with the system being reliable, and that's not something that I haven't encountered yet. So far, it's been really good. So, you know, perfect marks from me on the Garmin Zumo XT. So this is really the big one. Rottweiler Performance has a huge range of KTM 390 parts available, and I'm going to give them to you in no particular order, but we're going to start with the Akrapovic slip-on exhaust. This exhaust alone is way lighter than the stock exhaust, and it looks a lot better, but I will say it didn't really add a whole lot in terms of sound. It adds a bit of bass, a tiny bit more thump, but other than that, I didn't get a lot out of it. So for the price of nearly $700, I didn't really find it that worthwhile. Now that changed later when I added other parts to the bike, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just if you're buying that slip-on alone, know that it really doesn't make a whole lot of a difference in sound. If you want just a touch more thump and you'll be happy with that, then that's maybe an exhaust to think about, but if you're looking to get a pretty good growl out of your bike, the exhaust alone is not going to do it. So the next part is the KTM Power Parts aluminum radiator guard. Now, I've seen other radiator guards have some issues with blocking airflow or getting caked up with stuff and, causing the bike to overheat. I have not experienced that with the KTM Power Parts aluminum one. It's a bit on the pricier side, but I think if it means not getting caked up with stuff and causing an overheating issue, or just flat out blocking too much air, it's probably worthwhile. So the next one is the Rottweiler headlight braces. This one's a bit of an interesting story. When I initially procured it, the left side brace worked out perfectly fine, but the right side brace did not fit. For whatever reason, the holes didn't align properly, and I wasn't able to bolt the right side brace on at all. Like, you couldn't even get the screws started, much less run down. I contacted Rottweiler Performance about this issue, and what they told me was, well, your bike's made in India, so it's probably not accurate. I honestly thought that was kind of a lazy response from a customer service that clearly just does not want to deal with the issue. Further from that, my thought process here is if Rottweiler's looking at the bike saying, well, tolerance issues are a thing with an Indian-built motorcycle, then why make the tolerances on the brackets they're selling as tight as they did? It doesn't really make sense to me. So if you're going to procure these braces, which I still think are a good idea for the purpose of, you know, preventing your headlight stocky unit from coming off while doing hard off-road, if that's what you intend to do, I would maybe just go into it with the understanding that you're probably going to need to modify the brackets, which is what I ended up doing. I ended up having to modify the right side bracket by wallering out one of the holes so that I could get all of the bolts started and run down. The steel is really hard steel, by the way, so I ended up having to use a tungsten carbide bit in a Milwaukee tool to waller that out, and that allowed me to then fit the bracket, but that was problematic, honestly, in my opinion. So I would say if you're intending on buying those, just understand that they may not fit. So the next bit is the Galfer front and rear brake pads. I bought these at the same time as the new wheels that I had procured, and I did that primarily just because those come with new brake discs and I wanted a full new set to bed together. And the semi-metallic pads seemed to work really well, and they were reasonably affordable, so high marks there. So next up, we have the front brake reservoir cover. This piece is purely aesthetic. It doesn't really do anything. There's no advantages or performance gains to it. It just looks cool. I don't have a lot to say about it other than it works. And the next bit is actually the rear master cylinder brake cover. Again, it's just an aesthetic piece. I don't really have a lot to say about it other than it looks nice, and honestly, I haven't even installed that piece yet. I just have it sitting in the garage waiting to go on. Moving on from that, we have the Clean Speed PG billet brake pedal. This is for your right foot. I think personally for me, it's basically just a cosmetic piece. I never had any issue with getting a good purchase on the brake pedal while riding. Other people may not have the same experience, and in that case, you may find more benefit in something like this piece, but for me, it was just a cosmetic mod. There's also different shapes and sizes available through Rottweiler for brake pedals, so you might find one that is for you more comfortable or more functional. You know, your mileage will vary. That's very clear with this type of thing. The next one's really interesting. It's the Rottweiler Kickstand Switch Relocator. This is not a bypass piece. It maintains all of the original pieces, but what it does is it takes the magnet off the kickstand and the sensor off the kickstand mount, and it puts them together so that they're permanently stuck together with a little bracket, and then that bracket relocates off to a different area away from the kickstand. And what I did was I put it up underneath the skid plate and mounted it to an engine bolt. I found this to be a really good little solution. It works pretty well. I haven't had any issues with it so far. If you caught my last video, when we reached a couple of downhills and some speedier parts, I was having an issue with my boot hitting the kickstand and pushing it away, pushing the sensor pieces away, and it was causing the bike to stall out as I was riding. This part solves that issue, and I have so far found it to be a really good little bit for a really reasonable price. So the next one is the BRP Proline chain block. This piece I just installed, so I haven't really used it very much yet, but it's a really great thing to have. It's easy to install and it's relatively inexpensive. The long and the short of it here is that it helps prevent the chain from becoming derailed off of the rear sprocket, and it'll also protect the rear sprocket from getting hit by rocks as it sits directly in front of it and hangs down and really kind of covers that area where you could easily hit the sprocket if you were working through really tight technical rocky terrain or if you had a slide or a fall. So I think it's a worthwhile piece of protection. I'll have a little bit more to say about it later once I have a chance to use it a bit. The next piece is a Rottweiler brand accessory, and it's a rear brake master cylinder protection kit. Now, this kit is comprised of two little aluminum brackets that go on either side of the bike. only one of them actually protects the rear brake master cylinder, but they both have little slots in them that you can run nylon straps through for rackless luggage if that's what you want to run. And I actually found that to be really helpful in some of the moments where I did test that type of luggage out. So if you plan on using that, these are a great accessory to get. Initially when I bought them, I thought they would be a really great protection piece in case I do take a right side dirt nap in a really rocky area. They'll help prevent damage to the rear brake master cylinder. However, I had this experience where I was going to have my bike serviced and I wasn't wearing motorcycle pants. I was just wearing just regular pants. I swung my leg over the bike and I actually got my pant leg caught on the right side bracket, the one that covers the rear brake master cylinder. What happened was, as I was trying to get my foot to the ground, but my pants were hung up on that bracket, I actually bent that bracket over quite a ways. Now granted, it's just a flat aluminum plate, but I thought it was going to be much stronger than that. I was able to bend it over without even tearing a very thin pair of Columbia pants. I was actually really surprised. So ever since having that experience, I'm maybe a little bit less sure about how much actual protection they add. That said, I think some protection is better than none, and also having the added benefit of having the slots for you to run nylon straps through is still cool. So given that they were relatively inexpensive, I think they're probably still a worthwhile buy. The next two bits that we have are the drive system's 47 tooth rear sprocket, which is plus 2 teeth from the stock 45, and the drive system's 14 tooth front sprocket, which is a minus 1 tooth from the stock 15. Those two together both increase torque by a fair amount, and they're going to increase RPM at lower speed. The reason I made this change is that I do a lot of off-roading and I don't do enough on-road riding to really justify worrying about the extra vibration. And there is some extra vibration because you're running much higher RPM when you're at highway speeds. For me, that's not really a big deal. The area I live in mostly has 55-mile-an-hour highways. Unless I go quite a ways away, and I do quite a bit of off-road riding where I'm really not going that fast. What this actually did for me was it lowered the idle speed from about 8-9 miles an hour down to about 5 or 6 miles an hour, and it gave me a good bit extra torque at low RPM, so I was really able to work around in first and second gear off-road a bit better and have that extra punch for when I wanted to quickly accelerate, whether that's lifting the front end or just getting up a steep hill climb without very much of a run up or doing those kinds of things. So I really liked making that driveline change personally, but again, you know, it's going to vary based on how you ride and like what you need out of your bike. So for off-road riders, I highly recommend it. If you're doing other things with your bike, maybe not. So the next bit is the anti-gravity ATZ10 restart battery. I bought this because it has a really cool selling point that if you leave the key on or find some other way to drain the battery on your bike, you can use the restart feature to get enough juice to be able to start the bike. Now, I'd still recommend probably bringing a jump pack or something with you, but if by chance you don't have that, the restart feature is really cool. I haven't tested it yet, and I hope I don't have to, but we'll see as we have more adventures. Moving on, we have the KTM single Ergo Seat. This is a one-piece seat, unlike the factory two-piece one, and it's completely flat on top, so it doesn't have that step up that stops you from sliding back and forth when you're off-road. I find that it's really good for that, but there's two major drawbacks. The first is that it's not nearly as comfortable as the factory KTM two-piece seat is for longer road rides, and it raises the front of the seat up by about 1 inch. So if you're already struggling to touch the ground, it's just going to make it that much more difficult. Personally, I like having it for days when I just want to go off-roading, and in fact, in the last video that I put out, I was riding on that seat all day, And it was a great seat for that. You know, when you're off-roading, you're standing a lot, you're not constantly sitting on the seat, and I was perfectly comfortable. It did take me further away from the ground, so it was more difficult to dab where I wanted to, but I still really liked it, and I liked being able to slide back, you know, when I'm going downhill and I want to get that weight over the rear wheel, and it was easy then to slide way forward when I'm going uphill or when I just want to be up on the tank. So still a good piece. I would recommend it for people who are going to do a lot of off-roading. So the next bits are the Evitech front and rear spindle bobbins. I really haven't had a chance to use these yet, but they were simple to install and they seem like they're going to be very helpful with getting the bike up on stands, but I'll give more information on that later as I have a chance to actually use them. So this last bit from Rottweiler are the Yoshimura LED turn signals. These were a bit confusing. I ended up buying 2 sets of the front turn signals. If you talk to Yoshimura, they'll tell you that you have to buy the rear fender eliminator kit in order to get the rear LED turn signals. However, that's not actually true. It's another $200 or so to buy the fender eliminator, and frankly, I just wasn't that interested in it. I thought that the back of the KTM is already pretty clean, especially with the little drop-down piece removed. It just unscrews that takes the larger license plates. So I took that off and I just put a regular license plate on it, and it seems to be perfectly fine. So I ended up buying 2 sets of the front LED turn signals, and you can just install them backwards on the back. It's perfectly fine. The last bit that you need to go with that I purchased directly from Yoshimura, and that is you need 4 of the LED diodes. Those are relatively inexpensive, but you just need to know that you have to have those and they need to get soldered in line. I had that work performed by someone else, so I can't give a lot of detail on what that's like, but it seems relatively simple. So the next bit is the Competition Works KTM 390 Duke Chamber Delete. Now this bit is intended for the KTM 390 Duke, but it does fit on the KTM 390 Adventure, and it fit without any requirements for modification. I was able to just install it and it functioned perfectly fine. On the KTM 390, the chamber is the bit that sits inside of the swing arm right behind the rear shock that looks a lot like a catalytic converter, but it's actually just a resonance chamber. When you pull that chamber out, you can actually see one of the catalytic converters in the down tube, and then the other one is up in the header. There's 2 different catalytic converters on the 390. So installing this chamber does retain both of the catalytic converters, which is part of why it doesn't really change how it runs very much. Now, that said, the thing it did do was it elevated the sound of the bike a ton. All of a sudden, the Akrapovic slip-on exhaust sounded way better, and I was much more happy with the thump that I was getting out of the 390. So for what this piece costs and the simplicity of installation, I highly recommend it. Not to mention, it also gets a large heat source kind of away from your rear shock, which there's some debate about whether or not that actually affects rear shock performance. Even if it doesn't, it's still a great upgrade, so I highly recommend it. So the next bits we're going to talk about I procured from Rocky Mountain ATV, a company that I'm sure a lot of you who are watching are really familiar with. And we're going to start with the Motaz Tractionator Rals, or Rally. I'm not actually sure how you're supposed to pronounce it, but either way, they've been a really phenomenal set of tires, and if you go back about a year, I had done a first impressions video on them. Now that it's been a year and I've had 3,000 plus miles of experience riding on them, I'm actually working on filming a follow-up that you're going to see later this year, so keep an eye out for that. Suffice to say, the tires have been pretty good so far, and we're going to talk about the nuances of it in another video. So the next bit we procured from Rocky Mountain was a primary drive 520 ORV gold X-ring chain. I don't have a ton to say about this chain, but I will tell you that it's relatively quiet and it's done a really good job at standing up to corrosion, even when I don't always do the best job of completing maintenance on the chain in a timely fashion. So it's been really durable and good, and I would recommend it for anyone who's interested in a really nice, pretty gold chain. Next up, we have the Nelson Rig Trails End Tail Bag. Now there's different sizes of this, and I think I have the medium size on the back of the 390. It's been a really great little tail bag. It's very durable. It does come with a rain cover because it's not fully waterproof. I lost that rain cover almost immediately, and it's been rained on quite a number of times, but it's still kept all of my contents dry, so it on its own has actually been really decently rain resistant, and it's also really rigid and sturdy, and it's lasted 2 years on the back of the bike without any significant damage. So I found it to be a really good piece, and I've really enjoyed using it. Now moving on, we're gonna go to the Tusk High Front Fender kit. This kit for me was a big elevation for the bike because it really brought the look up. I really like the high front fender, the dirt bike look on my adventure bikes with the knobby tires, so for me that was super worthwhile. The only thing that I found a little bit disappointing about that piece was that because it's no longer reciprocating with the suspension, now there's the potential for the tire to close the gap and actually hit the fender. And when you bottom out the 390 suspension with that fender kit on, it does actually hit the fender and the hardware on the underside, which I've noticed if you do that enough, it will actually chew up your tire a little bit. So you just kind of have to be careful. Of course, upgrading your suspension or riding within the limits of the suspension you have will help prevent that from happening. It's just something that you need to be aware of. Okay, so the next item up that we procure directly from the manufacturer is the Double Take Adventure Mirrors. I have a set on the 390, and I've had a set on every dual sport and adventure bike that I've had in the last couple of years, and the reason is they're durable. You can drop the bike, you can really beat them hard, hit them with branches, do all the things, and the mirrors just take the abuse without breaking. Are they the clearest mirrors ever on the highway? No. Can they be a bit fussy to get into position? Sure. But they'll take a beating, and that's really what I need out of a set of mirrors. So for me, it's always the Double Take Adventure Mirrors. Sometimes the other models, but always Double Take. I really find them to be a high quality product, and I like using them. Next up, we're going to talk about the Powertronics Fuel X Lite and the DNA Airbox cover filter. So starting with the Airbox cover, the DNA filter replaces the actual cover to the Airbox, where normally you take the cover off and pull the filter out. The DNA one just replaces that whole cover as a filter, and it actually creates quite a bit more intake honk. You really hear the engine through the intake when you make that change. That coupled with the Powertronics Fuel X Lite on the 390 really fattened up the bottom and mid range, so there's a lot more like instant power there. It's still not like riding an 890 off-road, but it really was a noticeable increase in power when also combined with the exhaust mods that were already done on the bike. And the sound is just excellent. So I'm really happy with those two modifications, and they were relatively simple. The Fuel X Lite doesn't require a ton of extra wiring or soldering or splicing or anything like that. I was told is pretty much just plug and play, and that's what it seemed to be. So really cool little mod. It is a self-learning unit, so it takes a second for it to kind of figure out how to run the bike exactly, but the starts are a lot easier. I haven't had flame out issues, and it's definitely making more power in the bottom and mid range. You won't notice like top end rush power, really. That is pretty much the same as it always was. It's just going to create more middle of the power band torque. So the next bit is the T-Rex Racing skid plate that I have currently installed. If you've watched the channel for a while, you may have noticed that I've gone through several different skid plates, and that's been a real sore point with the 390 is finding a skid plate setup that I actually really like. So far, I've been most pleased with the T-Rex Racing one, but I also haven't used it a ton yet either. So as we get further into the season and we have more situations where we're bottoming the bike out and we're hitting rocks and we're doing those kinds of things, we'll see what it ends up looking like in the long term. But currently it seems to be the best option that I've experienced so far between the stock skid plate, the KTM Power Part skid plate, the Black Dog one, and now the T-Rex Racing one. So at this time, it seems like a pretty good upgrade, but we'll get more time on it off-road. We'll put it through more abuse, and we'll see how it ends up looking. So stick around for that in the future. The last bit we're going to talk about, also purely cosmetic, is the Moto Pro Works Custom Graphics Kit. I had it customized for me. The cost is going to be quite variable, so I'm not going to include it in the total here, but it was a really cool bit to put on the bike. There's some pros and cons to doing that kind of thing, and one of the cons is that you have to be more careful with cleaning your motorcycle after you have a kit like that put on. You don't want to get a lot of like pressurized water underneath it and end up blowing one of the panels off. There's also certain parts that didn't stick super great, and that's because the kit is made to cover panels that are texturized on the 390. So like there's two panels on each side kind of below the seat, and they have a texture to them. And there's also a matching set of panels with the same texture up by where the crash bars go, and they don't stick as well to those as I'd like them to, but they're significant pieces, so I don't want to not include them. I thought it was a little bit weird that that was the way that was set up, but one way or another, it was still a really cool kit, and it was something really awesome to do. Would I recommend it for most people? Probably not. It was relatively expensive, and it was also really difficult to find someone to put them on, but at the end of the day, it was a cool kit. That's basically it for everything that went onto the KTM 390 Adventure. I'm going to tally it all up on the screen, and I'll put a list of all the parts in the description. So if you're interested in any of these pieces, you can go look them up and find them on your own. So as you could tell from the tally, we spent nearly as much money on parts and accessories for the 390 as we did on the actual MSRP on the bike, and we definitely matched that if you include the custom suspension work that we had done. I really don't think doing that kind of build makes a ton of sense for most people, and going in, I knew that I was going to spend a significant amount on parts and accessories, but I didn't really think it would be quite that much. But I had a vision in my head about seeing how far I could actually push a small adventure bike, and at the time that I purchased the 390, it seemed like the most capable small adventure bike that was on the market in 2021. That said, I'm still really happy with this build, but today it might make more sense for someone to go and grab a KTM 790, or you could even still get pretty close to buying a KTM 890, and you'd have more suspension travel, more ground clearance, and more power than the 390 does, not to mention spoked tubeless wheels and an 1821 wheel combo, but only at the expense of a bit more weight. So suffice to say that doing a build like this doesn't really make sense for most people, but it was a fun project, and we're going to continue to see how far and how hard we can push this little 390, especially now that we've got it fully set up and the suspension's all done. So in upcoming videos in 2024, you're going to see us ride the thing pretty darn hard. And in fact, in next month's video in April, we're gonna attempt to ride a Black Diamond dual track trail. So stick around for that next month, and until next time, peace.